The Jerry Lewis MDA Telethon, September 5, 1976. 20 years had passed since Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had spoken to each other. 20 years of silence, bitterness, and wounds that never healed. Their breakup had been the most famous split in show business history, and everyone knew they hated each other. Jerry was on stage at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas, hosting his annual Labor Day telethon to raise money for muscular dystrophy. Millions watched on television. Hundreds filled the casino showroom. Then Frank Sinatra walked on stage unannounced and said 5 words that stopped America's heart. "I have a friend here." Dean Martin walked through the curtain. Jerry's face went white. His knees buckled. The audience erupted in screams and tears. After 20 years of silence, the two men who'd once been closer than brothers stood face to face on live television. They embraced. They cried. America cried with them. But what Dean whispered in Jerry's ear during that embrace, the words only Jerry heard, they didn't heal anything. They destroyed Jerry emotionally in a way the cameras never showed. Because sometimes, reunion doesn't mean forgiveness. And sometimes, the cruelest words come wrapped in a hug. Before we reveal what Dean really said that night and why it devastated Jerry for the rest of his life, hit that like button and subscribe. This story will break your heart till you understand what happened that September night. You need to know the real story of Dean and Jerry's partnership and the bitter destruction that ended it. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were magic together. From 1946 to 1956, they were the biggest act in show business. They made 16 movies together, sold out every nightclub in America, and became millionaires while still in their 20s. Dean was the smooth crooner, handsome and cool. Jerry was the wild comedian, physical and manic. Together, they created comedy that had never been seen before. But behind the laughter was growing resentment. Jerry, 12 years younger, had started to believe he was the real talent. He thought Dean was just a straight man, the singer who set up Jerry's comedy genius. Jerry started taking more control, directing their movies, rewriting scripts without consulting Dean, making creative decisions that pushed Dean further into the background. Dean felt disrespected. He'd been a successful performer before Jerry, had his own talents, his own dignity. But Jerry treated him like a prop, something to be used for Jerry's vision. The partnership that had made them both rich was suffocating Dean, turning him from an artist into a sidekick. In July 1956, 10 years after they'd started, it exploded. Dean walked into Jerry's dressing room at the Copacabana in New York and said 5 words. "I can't do this anymore." Jerry was shocked. "What do you mean? We're at the top. We're making millions." "I mean, I'm done being your straight man," Dean said quietly. "I'm done being erased so you can be the star. I'm done with this partnership." "You're breaking up Martin and Lewis?" Jerry's voice rose with panic and anger. "After everything I've done for you? I made you a star, Dean. Without me, you'd still be singing in dive bars." That was the knife that cut deepest. Jerry truly believed he'd made Dean Martin, and Dean would spend the next 20 years proving him wrong. The breakup was messy and public. Jerry told reporters that Dean had abandoned him, had destroyed the greatest comedy team in history out of jealousy and ego. Dean stayed mostly silent, but his friends knew the truth. He'd left because Jerry's ego had become unbearable, because being Dean Martin was better than being Jerry's prop. What followed shocked everyone, especially Jerry. Dean Martin became a massive solo star, bigger than he'd ever been with Jerry. His records topped the charts. His movies were hits. He joined the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra and became synonymous with cool sophistication. He conquered television with his variety show, becoming one of the most beloved entertainers in America. Jerry Lewis had success too. He directed and starred in his own comedies, some brilliant, some forgettable. But he never reached the heights Martin and Lewis had achieved together. And worse, he watched Dean become everything Jerry had told him he'd never be, a star without Jerry Lewis. The bitterness consumed Jerry. In interviews throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, Jerry would talk about Dean with barely concealed rage. "He's not the man I thought he was," Jerry would say. "He destroyed something beautiful because of his ego." Jerry convinced himself that their breakup was entirely Dean's fault, that Dean had been ungrateful and selfish. Dean, meanwhile, rarely mentioned Jerry. When reporters asked, he'd give short, diplomatic answers. "We had a great run. I wish him well." But privately, Dean was hurt by Jerry's public attacks. Hurt that Jerry couldn't just let him go. Couldn't accept that Dean had the right to build his own career. By 1976, they hadn't spoken in 20 years. Both were in their 50s now, their careers winding down. Dean's TV show had ended. Jerry's movie career had stalled. They'd both become legends, but the shadow of their partnership still followed them everywhere. Frank Sinatra watched his friend suffer from this feud with growing frustration. Frank loved both men. He'd performed with Dean in the Rat Pack for years. He'd known Jerry since the early days, and he hated watching two people he cared about waste energy on hatred and bitterness. In September 1976, Frank decided to do something about it. Jerry's muscular dystrophy telethon was the perfect opportunity. It was Jerry's baby, his charity work that he took more seriously than anything in his career. Every Labor Day weekend, Jerry would host a marathon television broadcast, raising millions for sick children. It was wholesome, emotional, and broadcast to millions of homes across America. Frank called Dean. "I want to bring you on Jerry's telethon. Surprise him on live TV. End this thing once and for all." Dean was hesitant. "Frank, I don't know. 20 years is a long time. Some things can't be fixed. Just trust me." Frank insisted. "It's time. For both of you." Dean finally agreed, but with conditions. "I'll show up. I'll hug him for the cameras. But I'm not pretending everything's fine, Frank. Too much has been said. Too much time has passed." Frank heard something in Dean's voice that worried him, but he pushed forward anyway. This reunion would be Frank's gift to show business, healing the most famous feud in entertainment history. What Frank didn't understand was that some wounds don't heal. Some silences last for a reason, and forcing a reunion doesn't guarantee forgiveness. September 5th, 1976, started like every other Labor Day telethon for Jerry Lewis. He'd been hosting for hours, bringing on guests, taking phone calls from donors, doing comedy bits with celebrities who stopped by to support his charity. The Sahara Hotel showroom was packed. Cameras broadcast every moment to millions of viewers across the country. Around 11:20 p.m. Pacific Time, Frank Sinatra walked on stage. Jerry's face lit up. Frank was always a ratings draw, always good for a generous donation. They hugged, exchanged some banter, and Frank made a pitch for people to call in and donate. Then Frank said, "Jerry, I have a friend here who loves what you do for these kids. Someone who wants to help you tonight." Jerry assumed it was another celebrity, maybe Sammy Davis Jr. or one of the other Rat Pack members. He smiled at the audience, waiting to see who would walk through the curtain. Dean Martin appeared. For a moment, Jerry didn't understand what he was seeing. His brain couldn't process it. "Dean, here, after 20 years?" The smile froze on his face. His body went rigid. Then his knees literally buckled, and Frank had to catch him to keep him from falling. The audience went insane, screaming, crying, standing, and applauding. The camera operators scrambled to capture every angle. The phone banks lit up with donors calling in, swept up in the emotional moment. This was television history happening live. Dean walked slowly across the stage toward Jerry, his face carefully neutral. No smile, no obvious emotion. Just a man fulfilling an obligation he'd agreed to. They stood face to face. These two men who'd once been inseparable, who'd created magic together, who destroyed each other with resentment and ego. Jerry's eyes were already streaming tears. His whole body trembled. "Dean," Jerry whispered, his voice breaking. Dean opened his arms, and they embraced. The audience's screams grew louder. People at home were crying. This was the reunion America had waited 20 years to see. But Jerry felt something wrong immediately. Dean's body was stiff. The hug was mechanical. There was no warmth in it, no real emotion. It was a performance, choreographed for the cameras and the audience, but hollow at its core. They stood there, locked in embrace, cameras capturing every second. Jerry was sobbing now. 20 years of pain and longing pouring out. He'd missed Dean, missed their friendship, missed the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. He'd convinced himself he was fine alone, but holding Dean again made him realize how much he'd lost. That's when Dean leaned close to Jerry's ear, his mouth hidden from the cameras, and whispered something only Jerry could hear. "This doesn't change anything between us." Jerry's body went rigid. Dean continued, his voice cold and quiet. "We're doing this for Frank, for the cameras, for your charity. But when I walk off the stage, we're done. I'm not your friend anymore, Jerry. I haven't been for 20 years, and I never will be again." Jerry tried to pull back, tried to look at Dean's face, but Dean held him tighter, maintaining the embrace for the cameras while delivering words that felt like knives. "You spent 20 years telling reporters I needed you, that I was nothing without you. You couldn't just let me go. You had to try to destroy me. Well, guess what? I became more successful without you than I ever was with you. And that kills you, doesn't it?" The audience was still applauding. Frank stood nearby, smiling, thinking his plan had worked perfectly. The cameras captured what looked like two old friends reconciling after years of estrangement. But Jerry was dying inside. This wasn't reconciliation. This was Dean's revenge, delivered in the cruelest possible way. In front of millions of people, wrapped in a hug that looked like forgiveness, but felt like assassination. "I agreed to come here tonight for one reason," Dean whispered. "To show you that I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need your friendship. I don't need anything from you. I came here to prove I'm the bigger man, that I can stand on this stage and hug you and walk away without it meaning a damn thing to me." Jerry's tears were falling faster now, but the audience interpreted them as happy tears. Tears of reunion and healing. They had no idea Jerry was being emotionally destroyed in real time. "So smile for the cameras, Jerry," Dean said. "Give them the show they want. But know that when I leave tonight, I'm leaving you behind. Again. Forever." Dean finally released the embrace, stepping back with a smile plastered on his face for the audience. Jerry stood there, trembling, his face wet with tears, trying to compose himself enough to speak. "Dean, Jerry's voice cracked. He couldn't form words. His mind was reeling from what Dean had just said. Dean turned to the audience, his arm around Jerry's shoulder in what looked like brotherly affection, but felt like a vice grip. "Let's hear it for Jerry Lewis, and all the amazing work he does for these kids." The audience roared. Dean waved, maintaining his smile. He shook Frank's hand, whispered, "Thanks for setting this up," and walked off stage. The whole appearance had lasted less than 5 minutes. Jerry stood there, paralyzed. He was supposed to continue the telethon, supposed to take more phone calls, do more bits, keep raising money. But he couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened. Frank, sensing something was wrong, jumped in. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a moment. 20 years, and these two legends finally reunited. Let's keep those phones ringing." He covered for Jerry, buying him time to recover. But Jerry never fully recovered that night. He went through the motions for the rest of the telethon, but everyone noticed the change. His energy was gone. His smile looked painted on. Something fundamental had broken. Backstage, after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience had gone home, Jerry sat alone in his dressing room. The telethon had been successful, raising millions for muscular dystrophy. By every measurable standard, the night was a triumph. The Dean Martin reunion moment would be played on news broadcasts for weeks, celebrated as one of television's greatest surprises. But Jerry felt hollow, destroyed. The man he'd loved like a brother, the man he'd hoped might actually forgive him after all these years, had just made it clear that forgiveness was impossible, that their reunion was a lie performed for ratings and charity. Frank Sinatra knocked on the door. "Jerry, can I come in?" Jerry nodded, unable to speak. Frank sat down, his face concerned. "That didn't go the way I hoped, did it?" "What did Dean tell you?" Jerry asked, his voice hoarse. "When you called him to set this up, what did he say?" Frank hesitated. "He said he'd do it for me, for the charity, but he was clear that it didn't mean he'd forgiven you." "Did you tell him I wanted to reconcile? That I've regretted how things ended?" "I told him you ask about him sometimes," Frank said carefully, "that you've seemed sad about the way things went between you two." Jerry laughed bitterly. "He didn't come here to reconcile, Frank. He came here to hurt me. to prove he's moved on, to show me that I don't matter to him anymore. His voice broke, and he succeeded. Frank looked uncomfortable. Dean's stubborn. You know that. But maybe this is a first step. Maybe now that you've broken the ice. There is no ice to break, Jerry interrupted. There's just cold. Pure cold. And I deserve it. He looked at Frank with tears in his eyes. I destroyed that partnership, Frank. I know everyone thinks it was mutual, but it wasn't. I pushed Dean away. I treated him like he was lucky to be with me instead of realizing I was lucky to be with him. This was the truth Jerry had been avoiding for 20 years. The truth he'd buried under bitterness and public attacks on Dean's character. He destroyed the best partnership in show business because his ego couldn't share the spotlight. Dean became a bigger star without me, Jerry continued. Everything I said he'd never be, he became. And I couldn't handle it. So I spent 20 years trying to tear him down in interviews, trying to convince everyone that he needed me more than I needed him. He wiped his eyes roughly. But he didn't need me. He never needed me. And tonight he made sure I knew it. Frank stood up, uncomfortable with the emotional rawness. Jerry, you're tired. It's been a long night. Get some sleep. Things will look different in the morning. But things didn't look different in the morning, or the week after, or the month after. The reunion had reopened wounds Jerry thought had scarred over. It forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding. That he'd been the bad guy in their breakup. That Dean had every right to walk away. That 20 years of bitterness on Jerry's part had been unjustified blame shifting. Worse, Jerry had to watch the media celebrate the reunion as a feel-good moment. Every news broadcast showed the hug, the tears, the apparent reconciliation. Everyone praised Dean for being the bigger man, for putting aside differences to support Jerry's charity. The narrative became Dean forgives Jerry, when the reality was Dean used his public reunion to privately destroy Jerry one final time. Jerry couldn't tell anyone the truth. How could he explain that the most celebrated moment of his career had actually been his most painful humiliation? Who would believe that Dean Martin had whispered cruel rejection while the cameras captured what looked like forgiveness? In the months and years that followed, Jerry Lewis changed. Friends and family noticed it. The anger that had defined him for 2 decades started to fade, replaced by something sadder. Regret. Real, deep regret for the way he treated Dean, for the partnership he destroyed, for the friend he'd lost. In 1989, Jerry did an interview where he finally told some truth. The breakup with Dean was my fault, he admitted publicly for the first time. I was young and stupid, and I thought I was God's gift to comedy. I treated Dean like he was disposable. And when he left, I blamed him for having the courage to walk away from my ego. The interviewer asked about the 1976 reunion. Jerry's face clouded over. That wasn't the reconciliation everyone thinks it was. That was Dean showing me that he'd moved on, that I didn't matter anymore. And he was right to do it. I'd spent 20 years attacking him. He had every right to hurt me back. Do you regret accepting Frank's reunion setup? Jerry thought for a long time. No, because it forced me to face the truth. For 20 years, I convinced myself that Dean was the bad guy, that he'd abandoned our partnership, betrayed our friendship. But that night, standing there with him on stage, hearing what he really thought of me, it destroyed the lies I'd been telling myself. What did he say to you? Jerry smiled sadly. That's between me and Dean, but it was what I needed to hear, even though it broke me. Dean Martin never publicly discussed what he'd whispered to Jerry that night. When reporters asked about the reunion, he'd give his trademark cool response. It was nice to see Jerry. Good cause. Glad I could help. But Dean's friends knew the truth. Dean had gone to that telethon with a purpose. Not to reconcile, but to end the chapter once and for all. To prove to Jerry, to himself, to the world, that he'd moved beyond Martin and Lewis. That he was Dean Martin, not half of a comedy team. In 1995, Dean Martin died. Jerry Lewis was not invited to the funeral. When reporters asked Jerry how he felt, he said simply, I lost my partner 40 years ago. I lost my friend even longer ago than that. Today I just lost the last chance to tell him I was sorry. In his final years, Jerry would talk about Dean with a mixture of love, and profound sadness. "I had the greatest partner in show business history," he'd say, "and I destroyed it because I couldn't share the spotlight. That's not Dean's failure. That's mine." The 1976 reunion, celebrated by America as a feel-good moment of forgiveness, was actually something much more complex. It was a public performance of reconciliation wrapped around a private declaration of permanent estrangement. Dean gave Jerry and the audience what they wanted to see, while making sure Jerry understood that appearances weren't reality. The lesson here? Some relationships can't be repaired, no matter how much we want them to be. Time doesn't heal all wounds, especially when the original injury was deep and the apology came too late. Dean Martin taught Jerry Lewis a brutal truth that night. You can't undo decades of damage with a hug. You can't expect forgiveness just because you finally recognize your mistakes. More importantly, Dean showed that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show someone they no longer have power over you. Jerry spent 20 years attacking Dean, trying to diminish his success, unable to let go. Dean's whisper that night was his way of saying, "You don't matter to me anymore." And that's not cruelty. That's freedom. For Jerry, it was devastating, but it was also necessary. It forced him to stop blaming Dean and start facing his own failures. It destroyed the false narrative Jerry had built about their breakup and replaced it with uncomfortable truth. And sometimes, that kind of destruction is the only path to real growth. Dean Martin didn't whisper words of forgiveness that night. He whispered words of finality. And while those words destroyed Jerry emotionally in the moment, they also freed him from 20 years of denial. Sometimes the cruelest kindness is refusing to pretend everything's fine when it's not. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell someone the truth they've been avoiding, even if that truth is, "We're done. Forever." And that's okay. If this story changed how you think about forgiveness, reconciliation, and the complexity of broken relationships, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share in the comments. Have you ever had a relationship that looked repaired on the outside but was broken on the inside? How did you handle it? And watch at 15:37 one more time. Jerry's face right after the embrace ends tells you everything you need to know about what Dean really said. That's not the face of reunion. That's the face of heartbreak.